and I stumbled across it by accident, surfing the internet. People ask why. I was actually researching my agent as an act of sheer desperation after many years of unemployment on my part. He said, why don't you write a sitcom about yourself? So I started writing a sitcom called The Gimp about a guy who trades the use of his handicap placard for sex. And it was a really politically incorrect concept.
Good parking though. I had very good parking for 30 years.
Yes, basically based on the arrangements I had with my wife. In the course of looking for tasteless material about sex and disability, I stumbled across Mark's article, and I think my head did a 180-degree turn, and I was very strongly impacted by it emotionally. And when I recovered my senses, I thought, this is a very doable movie. It certainly had all the emotional impact that I would want from a good story, but it was basically about two people in a room without all the boring qualities you typically get in a movie about two people in a room. So it really was an opportunity to reinvent ourselves as filmmakers, which we were lucky enough to do.
So, Judi, when you first heard about this article, did you think, oh yeah, that's absolutely a movie?
Oh yeah, it's a really easy pitch, you know, a film about sex and disability and Catholicism. You're on my table, so I will manage. My first reservation was that Mark's essay ends at the point where he and Cheryl parted ways, and Mark was in fact pretty disillusioned at that point, as he says in the film. You know, I thought my life would change, and it hadn't, and that, you know, and I was concerned about that being the place to end the story. But Ben sort of ignored my concern, as he usually does, and he kept researching it and came across Susan Fernbach, the real Susan Fernbach, and she lives up in Northern California, and she owned the rights to Mark's life story. I mean, unfortunately, we discovered that Mark had passed away in '99, and Ben came across the story in late 2006. So when we met Susan, there was the, you know, for me, the proverbial happy ending, and they had 5 years together that was really wonderful, and she's fabulous. And so then we were on board, and we, you know, I said, well, you know, you had to sit down and do the hard work of writing it. So then another few years went by, and we took off.
So I apologize, I didn't know before this that you, at the age of 6, suffered polio. And so you've been on crutches, I guess, since then, right?
Yeah, actually, one of the most unusual questions I've been asked during the whole publicity tour for the movie, this was in Zurich, someone asked me if I was a publicity stunt for the movie.
That was a pretty shocking question.
A question from which I'm still recovering. But, and I sometimes wonder if I'd been asked to be a phony polio survivor, whether I would have done it. But you know, as it happens, yeah, and people often ask how relevant is this to the movie and my take on the subject, and it's impossible to separate it, say it has nothing to do with it. I mean, obviously, I do feel a certain kinship towards Mark, only in the sense that our families would have gone through the same ordeal at the same time. But really, I had to separate myself from that and look at it just as a filmmaker and from the point of view of a general audience. And I think you know, the subject really only took hold once I was satisfied that this was not for the benefit of an audience of people in iron lungs, and that really it had something very universal to say, and I think it speaks to everyone's fear of sex. So I was, in the end, happy to exploit the fact that I already had polio, and if someone would say, you know, well, obviously he's the ideal person for the job, I would say, of course.
When you saw the script, Judi, and I know you collaborated on the script as well, what is the next step? Where do you take a screenplay that is challenging and is obviously challenges audiences, challenges actors? It's not necessarily going to be a blockbuster, as they say in the business. How do you take that pitch out?
Well, we sent it to all the obvious places and got rejected by the best of them. And we also looked for public, for funding in Australia, and that was not accessible to us either. And eventually, we sort of came to the conclusion the only way we could get it made was if we basically hit up all our friends and family for money. And so that's what we ended up doing. We had one very good friend who's been very successful, who just coincidentally was with Ben when he met Cheryl Cohen Green for the first time. He'd been vacationing in the US, and Ben said, "Come along," and so he did. And he said, "Well, if you're going to make a movie, I'll put up the first 20%," which was, everybody wants to hear that. That was fantastic. But at that point, we didn't have a script, and we didn't know how much it would cost. We knew it would be cheap, I guess. We knew it wouldn't be an expensive film to make. There's no cannons and no masses of water.
Very little CGI, right?
Not a lot of CGI in there. No, not at all. What you see actually is everybody working as they are, which is fantastic. And so that we did eventually just do that to raise the money. Ben was in Australia, asking people, and then as we got closer to production and we had, what we thought was enough for the budget proved not to be quite enough, and so I was making phone calls at night to Australia and in the US, and people kept adding to the pot for us while we were still shooting, which was great.
We did have in our favour the fact that while we were looking for money, the Australian dollar had shot up to some enormous rate, and it just made sense. And the few rich people that we knew happened to be in Australia.
It made little sense. Most of them had never invested in film before. They knew it was a risk, and we took a lot of advantage of their naivety. But I think most of them felt that they loved the story. They were investing in us as much as anything else, and a lot of them, I think, thought they'd never see the money again. But we've been lucky enough to give it all back to them and more, which was fantastic.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
It's a miracle, actually. Thanks.
We had the great fortune of having John Hawkes here when he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for his role as Teardrop in Winter's Bone. He's a wonderful guy. Just such a nice guy. What made him the right actor for this role, then?
To some extent, what you've just said. I mean, it didn't take me long in looking at his work to realise what incredible versatility he had, and there was no. I couldn't have any concern about how much work he would put into preparing the role. I think what probably really swung it for me was that I found him to be a nice guy, and here I looked at this role that he'd played, these creepy roles, both in Martha Marcy May Marlene and in Winter's Bone, and this was nothing like the man at all. I mean, he's the sort of person that really we became friends. You don't often become friends with the actors. I mean, it's an odd thing to say, that there is typically a distance between the director and the actors. And I feel him to be a friend, and I did from a very early point, and I thought, this guy is not unlike the character of Mark O'Brien that I want to get across. So that was probably one of the most persuasive things that I thought, if I like him, other people will too.
He's incredible in this role. He is really just, what an amazing performance. And, Helen Hunt, I would assume that the way the screenplay was written, the way the script was written, that it called for nudity. And was that ever a discussion with Helen Hunt? Was that a concern for her?
I mean, she loved the script. She said it's rare that you read something and you turn the last page and you just say, it's great. There's usually, well, maybe if they do this or they tweak that, or perhaps if they, but she loved the script as, from the start, which was great. I think her main concerns were that she didn't want to, she wanted to be reassured that Ben was not a creep. And that, I mean, it was helpful that when he first went to meet her, I dropped him off. Our 11-year-old, who's the little girl running on the beach in the flashback scene, she's now 13, but at the time she was 11, and she dashed in to meet Helen and talk about surfing. So they had that in common, and we were clearly a family. And so that was reassuring for her, and she wanted to know who the DP was. And I believe she asked Ben, how are you going to shoot the sex scenes? And his answer was the same as we're going to shoot everything else. This was not going to be couched in silly photography with, curtains blowing in the wind and everything a little bit, misty. And that it was going to be real as it read on the page. And I think those three things really made a difference for her. And she knew what it called for. She wasn't asking for it to be anything less.
They say that, the actors will often say the day they shoot the love scene is the day that they dread or they're the most nervous about. And these two actors spend a lot of time in bed together in that film. What was the set like?
Well, it's probably different for everyone. I mean, Helen remembers particularly the boom swinger. I mean, the boom swinger is the guy who holds the microphone pole, and she remembers that he was painfully shy and embarrassed, and that he was constantly looking at his feet. And so, for him, it was obviously very awkward and difficult. For the actors, I think it was probably, once it was like you walk on and start doing it, it probably becomes easy, and certainly it seemed that way. I, in advance of the whole thing, was really frightened. I mean, fortunately, I think I was able to conceal my own nervousness.
He doesn't know anything about sex.
That's why I wanted to make a film. I think that, one of the things we got away with, which I probably wouldn't have tried as a younger director, was we didn't do any rehearsal. What you see on the screen is the first time they tried to do it. And they didn't know each other. They didn't have any private dinners together or anything like that. The first day that they were in bed together, they were pretty much total strangers.
John Hawke says it's very difficult to lie completely still when Helen Hunt is undressing you.
And I think that what we managed to do was to bring the kind of energy of the natural nervousness that these two actors had for each other as actors and as people, and use it in their performance. And I think they both will look back on this as a kind of a little bit of a milestone, in that I'm not sure that they've tried that stunt before. But it was exciting to really break the rules in that sense.
We did have one sort of fortuitous situation, which was the very first scene we shot with Helen where she had to get naked was in the ritual bath scene, in the mikveh scene. And everybody, is very quiet and respectful, and it can be a little somber on set when you're going to be doing nudity. And Helen came out in the bathrobe, and everybody's sort of getting ready to do the shot. And when she dropped her robe for the first time, Palme was the one who shouted out, "Oh my, what a body!" And it was perfect. It was from the perfect person at the perfect time, and it sort of broke the ice, and the atmosphere was much lighter after that. That was that was really the only scene I think we shot on location, and the rest of the sex scenes were shot chronologically in studio.
Ben, you told me that your last feature film was 18 years ago.
Yes. It's been a little bit while between drinks.
And so what happened during that period?
Well, we had a baby.
The
third. We started, in fact, making our own grandchildren because we've got two other, much older children, so that we can't wait around for them. So we've got a little one as well. And I did quite a lot of parenting and sent the wife out to work, which I highly recommend.
I do not, but he does.
I think that you know, part of me thought that it was all over, that, you know, I'd had my career and I should be happy for what I had, and, you know, I was making half-hearted efforts to get back in and really banging my head against a brick wall. I mean, the industry was becoming more and more brutal, particularly with the onset of reality television, about which I knew nothing and about which I want to know nothing. So it was really very, very tough. And stumbling across Mark's story, I don't know, it just thought, we thought we've got nothing to lose, and it's very doable, it's not going to cost much. And I think that sort of who gives a damn attitude was probably very helpful.
He's being a bit modest. He did write 3 other scripts in that time as well. And he's not a fast writer, but he was writing other projects, and you know. But then everything got put to the side when we came across this story.
I want to take some questions. Absolutely. I want to ask one more thing before I take some questions. The film, I think, debuted at the Sundance Film Festival.
That's right.
Was probably the most talked about film from that festival. It won, I think, the Audience Award?
Yes, that's right.
So the most popular film at the festival.
Yeah. That and an ensemble award, a special jury prize for the ensemble acting.
When did you know before it went to Sundance that it was special?
I think that the fact that it got into Sundance for us was very special. I mean, we started celebrating at that point, and wow, we've gotten to Sundance. I mean, because the odds against getting into Sundance are huge. I mean, in our category, there were over 2,000 applications for 16 movies. So that's when we thought we'd hit the jackpot. So actually doing what we did at Sundance was really winning the lottery. We had not anticipated that at all.
Yeah, my feeling is that up until we got to Sundance, pretty much anyone who'd seen the film was associated in some way, so we didn't really have any kind of genuinely objective view of it. So I was pretty nervous about how it was going to be received. So it was very exciting to have the very first screening at the Eccles with 1,270 people, waiting to see if they were getting the tone of the film, whether they would laugh when we wanted them to laugh, and whether it went quiet, you know. And so that was very exciting to sit there for that. And then when they gave us a massive standing ovation at the end of it, in fact, too, that was incredible.
And if you don't know, the film has been nominated, well, it won at Sundance.
Yes.
It's been nominated for 2 Golden Globe Awards, Best
Yes.
Actor for John Hawkes, Best Supporting Actress
We
for
also
Helen
won
Hunt.
the Audience Award at San Sebastian in Spain,
Yeah.
and it actually just started playing in Spain today.
They seem to like films about sex and Catholicism.
And Screen Actors Guild nominations, and
Yes.
talk of Oscar nominations, and it's, I mean, it's just a resounding success.
Yeah, I
It's
know it's
unbelievable.
been really tough.
We'll take some questions here. Yes, sir.
There's this scene right near the end where he's listening to a baseball game and he's in bed in the gurney, and that struck me very hard because it's sort of the whole thing of the movie. The thing is over with the sex, and he's got the baseball he's listening to, and he's not happy at all. It shows, without him saying anything, just his face, it shows how meaningless baseball is to him at this time, and how what he left was so much important. So he really is, that's a great scene.
Yeah,
Thank you.
he's talking about the fact
power.
that he loves baseball.
Yes.
And I actually, because I work in sports, I know people, for example, people who are blind, who listening to baseball games or listening to, in the day, Chick Hearn doing basketball games, it was an important connection in their world. Mark was a big baseball fan, is that?
Yes, he wrote poems about baseball. I mean, I know nothing whatsoever about it, but the incident with the power outage was real. I mean, that did happen. And in fact, I've had people tell me that the power failure didn't happen at that point in the game. and I got that detail wrong.
Kind of matched it up with the year and the this and the that.
But
and
I
said it
think
was
that's,
during the pre-game.
Did somebody
that's-
really go to that level? They figured out
Absolutely.
that Howard did not go out at that point in the
Yes,
game.
yes, that's quite right. But I
thank you
think
for
that's
noticing
a
the
very
sensitivity.
interesting observation, that the expression on his face was it wasn't a very fulfilled one. It's very interesting.
You can see that's why I didn't want the film to end there.
Yeah. Yes.
Great film, thank you very much. Question is, were there any alternative endings written? And if so,
Alternative
what were
ending.
they?
Alternative endings. Were there any alternative endings?
Yes, I mean, I must have written about 4 drafts, maybe 5 drafts of the script. And there was one version of it where I developed the relationship between him and Susan Fernbach more. So you saw kind of how did it, what did they connect on, and so on and so on. And really, I found that I was starting to tell another story rather than completing the first story. And I went back to, I think that was probably my original concept of the ending. I think I always had the shot of the cat on the iron lung in my mind as an end shot. And that really the only substantial thing I wanted to say in the end was that there was a connection between these 2 women, in that there was a continuity between what one woman had started and the other woman had completed, and that in a way the message of the film was that sex was only the beginning.
And the beauty of that ending, I think, is that and I see a lot of movies, I never saw it coming. I even at the moment she said, I have a poem to read,
Yes.
I didn't necessarily think in my head, oh, it's that poem that he sent, all those 5 years ago, which I thought was just so powerful and so inspiring.
She's actually, they had a literary, publishing company, a small, home one, called The Lemonade Factory, which she's just revived. And Mark's poetry will be available online for people to buy. The books that, she's going to be re-releasing, which is
Wow, that's great.
up the back.
Yes, hi.
I'm wondering about the age. He was 38 at the beginning, and then it passed 5 years when he went with the volunteer lady. And
Yes.
when he died, he said he was 48.
He's 48. He was, in fact, I cheated a little bit. He was 49 when he died.
There was a gap in between when he and Cheryl parted ways. Before he actually met Susan, there was actually quite a substantial amount of time.
In fact, I have to confess that this happened when he was 36. And at a certain point, I got a little bit nervous about what John Hawke's screen age would read as. And I, on the day, I just said, say 38. I got stuck with it, but the real age was 36, and it also had to do with the period I wanted to set it in, because the closer you make it to the present day, the less cost we have in the art department, so all sorts of crazy little issues come up with the chronology, but we stuck pretty close to the truth.
And also, where were Mark's parents during this time?
Where were Mark's parents? I don't know. I think that they've passed away, and I think that really there's very little reference to them in Mark's article, and that's basically what I used as a blueprint. And I thought that dramatically it was going to be telling another story if I went into the whole relationship with his parents. I wanted to keep it simple.
Right up the back.
All the way in the back.
Aside from the ritual bath that you said you started with, at least as far as her nudity is concerned, did you shoot it chronologically so that they could build the rapport? And the second question is, how on earth would you get it in front of the actor?
How did I get?
How did you, so the first thing is, aside from the ritual bath, was it shot chronologically? And then how do you get it in front of actors like this?
Oh, okay. Taking it in order, we shot the sex scenes, the intimate scenes, chronologically. But you can't, yeah, and that was something that was very important to us, and I think the actors appreciated. Interestingly enough, Helen was sick initially, and we had to rejuggle the schedule, and as it turned out, the scene, which is the end of her emotional arc, where she goes to the car after the last session and the other woman comes out and gives her the envelope, that was the very first scene she shot, which was an extraordinary thing. I mean, you know, not a murmur of disapproval, or you just went and did it. And really that was, I knew at the time and didn't say anything, but it was a pretty big ask to say to an actor, you're going to do where you end up before you do anything else. But really, you know, she found absolutely the right note for it, and it just worked perfectly. What was the other question? How did we get actors?
Yeah, I mean, basically, our casting director, Ronnie Eskel, I mean, I think they're the unsung heroes of this industry, and she was the one who, she's known John most of his career, and she was the one who introduced the project to John, and then, you know, put John and Ben together, and that once John came on board, and it was announced in Variety that this was something he was going to be doing in a couple of months, then everybody else pricks up their ears. Suddenly all the agents are, what's this project John Hawkes is doing? And the word starts to get out that there's a fabulous role for a woman in her 40s. And there's so few great roles and so many wonderful actresses out there. And so the floodgates kind of opened for us actually at that point. And a number of great actresses saw the project and were, you know, being considered and talking about it.
Yes, Kate.
Hi, I love the film. My name's Kay Shackleton for Examiner.com. In the same vein as the actors, I loved William H. Macy as the priest. When did he come along, and was the role for the priest in his writings, original writings, as big as it was in the film?
The question for people in the back is the character of the priest, which is played by William H. Macy. Was that character as significant, or that priest as significant in the article as he was in the film?
Well, the priest was in the article, and that made it irresistible, the fact that it was true. I didn't know much about the priest. He didn't say much about him, except what happened between them, that he went to, you know, seek his advice, and the priest said, go ahead and do it. You know, Jesus will understand. It was pretty close to the words that Mark described. But for the purposes of the screenplay, the character developed in an interesting way, because one of the things I had difficulty with earlier on was how incredibly explicit some of the material was. And I found myself unable to visualize doing that, certain things on screen. Just going too far made me cringe. And then I thought, well, if instead of showing it, I have him telling the priest about it, move it from the bedroom to the confessional, then it becomes, you've got the information, but it also becomes funny. And so that's how that really developed. I thought, there are things that I want to say, and you can take your choice where to say them, and so it became a kind of pattern. I would have him say the most difficult things in church, and Bill just brought so much to it. You know, it was incredible. I didn't. Those days that we spent in the church, I just kind of sat back and watched these two geniuses doing their stuff. It was really wonderful for me.
He was sort of, Bill was handed to us on a platter, really, because fortunately he's represented by the same agent as Helen. And we were casting that role, and then Helen's agent called up and said, what about William H. Macy for that role? And it was kind of like, give us a millisecond to say yes to that. Why hadn't we thought of it earlier? But it was also, you're lucky if everybody happens to fit into the schedule at the right time. And in fact, after we'd had to shift the schedule for Helen, we lost the guy who was supposed to be originally play her husband in the film, and so we were scrambling to find somebody else, and suddenly we had Adam Arkin, so it was another little mini coup that came along just by fluke. So we felt very fortunate.
My original thought actually was I wanted